This is the diabetes plate method, which is a simple and effective way to plan balanced meals that help manage those crucial blood sugar levels. And this is a photo courtesy of the CDC, which is the Center of Disease Control. So we want to make sure that we're visualizing that we see over here a standard 9-inch plate, and we're going to divide it into three sections. So as you see, the larger section is filled with non-starchy vegetables. So these are examples such as your leafy greens, broccoli, peppers, carrots that you see on the screen there. So that's what you really want to focus on when it comes to a diabetes plate method, or even just a general plate. We want to make sure that we're filling half of it with, those nice, colorful vegetables. The more vegetables you have on your plate, the more vitamins and nutrients that you're getting too. But when it comes to preventing or managing your diabetes, we do want to focus on those non-starchy vegetables. And later on in the presentation, I will talk about some of sources or examples of non-starchy vegetables. Now, another quarter of your plate you want to fill with a whole grain. So these are things that more of like your complex carbohydrates. So these are things like your whole grains, some starchy vegetables even, and some beans too. But we do realize that it doesn't take up the whole plate. Now I understand that some of our cultures, we tend to fill the entire plate with a starchy food items such as say rice or pasta. So when it comes to diabetes, we do want to make sure that we're reducing that portion size and really focusing on what I like to call some of those complex carbohydrates. All right, and then last but not least, that we see on the other quarter of their plate, you really want to fill it up with a lean protein. So you see over there we have a lean grilled chicken breast, or you can do turkey without the skin. It doesn't need to be an animal protein. You can do some plant-based protein, for example, like tofu, or had a little bit more of beans, but you do want to be mindful of the portion size. So make sure that what you see over there when it comes to an animal protein, that it's the size of your hand, pretty much the palm right over here. That's proportionate to what your body type is going to be needing. And then last but not least, we do want to make sure that we're drinking plenty of water over there and having some healthy snacks like some fresh fruit. Fortunately, we're in the summer season. There's a lot of fruits that are coming in to play over here. We see the berries and stuff like that, peaches, nectarines, plums. So you do want to make sure that you're experimenting and trying different fruits and vegetables too. That way you're getting those different vitamins and nutrients. So here we have it, the diabetes plate method. Again, we're going to go over it one more time. Half of your plate, fill it up with those non-starchy vegetables. Another quarter of your plate, we want to look into your complex carbohydrates or your whole grains. And then last but not least, those lean proteins. And when it comes to poultry, I mentioned breast before, but you can also do a thigh. That's another healthy cut. Anything closer to the bones, such as, your wings or your drumstick, they are going to have a higher amount of fat and a higher amount of cholesterol, which can have some negative effects when it comes to managing your diabetes. So we do want to make sure that we're being mindful of those type of cuts that we're having. So the next thing that we're going to talk about are your carbohydrates. So what we have in the screen over here is just different example of different carbs. Remember, carbs, this doesn't have to be whole grains. We do find it in our fruits and our vegetables as well. So the next thing we're going to have to answer over here on the screen is, what carbohydrates raise the blood sugar more quickly? Is it A, complex, or B, simple? And I'm going to give everyone a few moments to write their answer in the chat. All right. So what do you think? Which type of carbohydrates raises the blood sugar more quickly? All right, and we're going to see, I'm seeing a lot of A's. All right, let's find out. And it's B, simple carbohydrates. They're the ones that actually raise the blood sugar. So carbohydrates directly impact blood sugar levels because they are broken down into glucose, which is what enters the bloodstream. So for people with diabetes, managing carbohydrate intake is essential to avoid any spikes in blood sugar and maintain an overall good blood glucose control. So again, we want to focus more on those complex carbohydrates, which are your whole foods, your fresh fruits and vegetables. And then the simple carbs are more of your refined. And as you can see here, it's a little bit more of the processed foods. So we do want to make sure that we're keeping those at bay. And I see on the screen over here that you also have some pasta. As I mentioned before, it's a simple carb. So we do want to make sure that we're being mindful of the portion sizes if we're having a dish like that. But really, the focus is more complex carbohydrates versus the simple carbs. All right, so your simple carbohydrates that you see on the screen, though, are those found in your sugary foods and your drinks, and they're rapidly broken down into glucose in the digestive system. So that quick breakdown leads to a rapid increase in your blood sugar levels. And as the glucose is swiftly absorbed into the bloodstream, that's where it raises it very quickly. So for individuals with diabetes, consuming those simple carbohydrates that you see on the screen can cause those sudden spikes in blood sugar, making it challenging to maintain, a control with your blood glucose levels. So we want to make sure that if you are diabetic, that we're stabilizing those glucose levels, all right? So next we're going to talk all about starches. So foods that are high in starch, which are the ones that we do want to be mindful of and reducing the amount that we're having on a daily basis, are your starchy vegetables like corn, potatoes, and lima beans. You see on the screen over there too, some dried beans and peas, including kidney beans, black-eyed peas, split peas, and pinto beans. And then you have some of your grains like oats, rice, and barley. So these foods over here, the high starchy foods, can lead to rapid increases in blood sugar levels due to their high glycemic index. So frequent consumption of these foods can contribute to insulin resistance and also weight gain. So both which are risk factors for developing that type 2 diabetes. So managing the intake of these high starchy foods and choosing whole grains such as those complex carbohydrates can help maintain a healthier blood sugar levels and reduce the risk of developing diabetes. But as I said before, it's not like you can't have these foods. You just want to be mindful of your frequency. And as it says on the screen over there, always check your portion sizes. So these are the non-starchy vegetables, the ones that you want to have on the majority of your plate. So you can see it's a very big list over here of different things that you can choose from. It doesn't need to be the same vegetables. Go ahead and try and experiment with a few other ones. Play with some herbs and spices just to enhance some of their flavor. Maybe even try a different cooking technique. I know I'm someone who prefers to have grilled vegetables, and the summertime is a great day, a great time, and a great opportunity to go ahead and fire up that grill and grill up some of these vegetables. So you can see a good amount. So cucumbers are really coming into season. If you're one of those people who has a garden and is able to, grow some cucumbers, lucky you. But as I said before, there are plenty of options that you see on the screen there. So if you don't like one, you can always go ahead and move on to the next and try different cooking methods to help you get more comfortable eating more of these non-starchy vegetables. And now when it comes to buying fresh versus frozen, you can buy either or. I always like to tell members that if you're buying a frozen product, you're not being deprived of any essential nutrients or vitamins. What happens when vegetables or fruits are getting picked or harvested for, the frozen process, they're being harvested at their ripeness. So this is where you're getting peak amounts of essential vitamins and nutrients. So you're still getting the same amount. It may vary from time to time, but you're still getting a good amount of vitamins from those frozen options. So in today's climate where things seem to be a little bit more expensive, especially when it comes to fresh fruits and vegetables, you can always go for and opt for a frozen option. All right. So what we have here, these are the less starchy vegetables too. So these are ones that we want to eat less of because they are a little bit higher in that glycemic index that I mentioned before. So again, I'm not saying you can't eat these, but these are ones that you do want to be mindful of how frequent you're consuming them. So I know corn is a big summer vegetable. It tends to be at every functioning that we're going outdoors. So if that's something that you do like, you do want to keep it at bay and just be mindful of the portion size. Instead of having a full cup, maybe go for half a cup. Instead of having an entire corn on the cob, maybe just go for half of it. So these are things that you can do to practice and be mindful of when it comes to starchy vegetables. So as you see on the screen there, we have your beans. Your butternut squash is not really into season. That's more of your fall vegetable. We have chickpeas, corn, lentils, parsnip, peas, potatoes, sweet potatoes, taro, and yams. Again, all of those potato options that we're seeing, right? So we do want to be mindful of the portion sizes when it comes to those higher starchy vegetables. And as it says on the screen, eat less. I'm not saying be restrictive and don't have them at all, just be mindful of your frequency of the consumption of them. All right, so what we have over here is just an example of the types of grams of carbohydrates and calories that you can find in a starchy vegetable versus a non-starchy vegetables. So starchy vegetables such as mashed potatoes are higher in carbohydrates and calories compared to their non-starchy counterparts, like we see on the other side with the broccoli. For instance, as we see on the screen, a half cup serving of mashed potatoes provides 15 grams of carbs and 80 calories. These vegetables, as we understand, can cause a more significant increase in your blood sugar levels, making portion control very important for those managing diabetes. Again, the discussion here is not being restrictive, but just being mindful of the portion sizes. So in contrast with your non-starchy vegetable, like cooked broccoli, are lower in carbohydrates and calories, making them a healthier option for blood sugar management. So as we see on the screen here, a half cup serving of cooked broccoli just contains only 5 grams of carbohydrates and 25 calories. So these vegetables are rich in fiber, your vitamins and minerals, contributing to a better overall health and more stable blood sugar levels. So again, you can go ahead and make the comparison. So when it comes to sugar, we understand that sugar is a simple or fast-acting carbohydrate, and we understand that it raises blood glucose levels very quickly. So when it comes to, your grocery shopping, you do want to be mindful of reading the labels and looking out for the many names and forms of sugar. And you always want to be checking your portion sizes as well. This is very important, especially if you're someone who tends to eat out a lot or maybe buys a lot of snacks. This is where you can start, changing some of those habits and being a little bit more mindful. So some forms of sugar and names of sugar we see over here are your table sugar, your powdered sugar, your honey, your maple syrup, cane sugar, that high fructose corn syrup, which we know just causes a lot of other risks for developing different types of chronic illnesses as well. We have your confectioner sugar and your brown sugar. Now, I'm not saying you can't have any of these, but you do want to be mindful of your portion sizes when it comes to them because these are fast-acting carbohydrates, which are going to raise that blood sugar very quickly. So all about fiber. Now, fiber is the part of the plant food that can't be digested. And it's recommended that we have a dose of 25 to 30 grams a day, which is roughly a little bit under an ounce if you're trying to measure anything out. But if you do have a food scale, this is where it becomes handy. Americans tend to not get enough fiber on a daily basis. And fiber is very important when it comes to stabilizing your blood sugar levels, but also maintaining a healthy weight. So some good sources of fiber include whole grain breads and cereals. You do want to be mindful though of those cereals that do have a good amount of sugar. So do be mindful of them. You have your nuts as we see on the screen over there, and they can be, any type of nuts, tree nuts, pine nuts, pistachios, walnuts, cashews, stuff like that. Experiment with a little bit of them. But when it comes to nuts, I always get people, well, what about those flavored nuts or those nuts that contain salt in them? You do want to make sure that when you're buying nuts that it's in their raw, natural form. And that's with anything when you're going grocery shopping or, looking for, say, example, a yogurt. You do want to go for the plain versions. It's going to be the least processed and it's going to have not as many additives or different types of preservatives or sugar. So you do want to make sure you're being mindful in reading those labels. So the fiber is also found in fruits and vegetables. That slide that we showed earlier today with the mashed potatoes versus the broccoli does have a good amount of fiber, so that's something that you can add into your daily routine. And then we also have the beans and legumes, but we do understand those are some of the starchier vegetables, so do be mindful of your portion sizes. So all about fats. It's very important to make sure that you are watching out for what kind of fats you take into your diet. So below are some good examples of good versus bad fats. So your good fats are monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats. So these sources of good fats are things that you'll find in oils such as olive oil, your nuts, and your avocado. The bad fats, which are saturated or trans fats, these tend to be more solid at room temperature. So think butter, stuff like that. But sources of bad fats are really found in heavily processed foods, such as fast foods as hot dogs, French fries, some cheeses, and even donuts. So these are things that you do want to keep at bay. Now, I don't really like the word bad, but it does have some negative consequences to your overall health if you're consuming these types of fats on a frequent basis. Now, again, the focus here is not being restrictive. It's just being mindful and reducing the frequency of consumption of these things. So you do want to be mindful if you're someone who tends to have a lot of processed foods, and I know this summer is a great time to be grilling up those hot dogs. Not saying you can't have them, you definitely can. Just be mindful of your portion sizes, or maybe pair it with, a healthy non-starchy vegetable. So these are things that you can be focusing on. Now, we're going to be focusing right now with these nutrition labels, which is very important. And I know for most, it can seem a little overwhelming. So we do want to make sure that we're taking our time when we're at the supermarket, grocery shopping, to really sit down or just look at the labels a little bit more intently. So reading nutrition labels effectively involves focusing on key information to make healthier choices. And the first thing that you're going to want to look at is looking at the serving size. So you want to start by checking the serving size and the number of servings per container. All the nutritional information on that label is based on this serving size. So for example, say you're looking at a package and this is the serving size of 1 cup, but you ate the entire package. You're going to have to double up what you're seeing on the screen over there. So this is where, really portioning things out comes into play, because you don't want to be consuming more than you should, especially if you're trying to be mindful of your diabetes status. So the serving size information label is based on this, right? So keep in mind that packages often contain more than one serving. As I said before, it's not like going to be half that package that you're going to be eating. Sometimes you're going to be eating the whole thing. So you do want to be mindful that you're reading the back of the label. So this example shows that the package contains 2 servings, but the information provided is only for 1 serving. So you do want to be mindful of that. All right, so the container has 2 servings, but each serving is a cup. So you do want to look at that very intently. So the next thing that we're going to be focusing on are your calories. So look at the calorie content per serving to manage your energy intake. And as the screen shows over there, that's where you want to look at when you're counting calories. The best calorie intake varies from person to person, and everyone loses weight at a different rate. About 3,500 calories is equal to 1 pound of weight. So eating something like 500 less calories each day could help you lose up to 1 pound of weight. So the next thing that we're going to be looking at nutrients to limit. So these are some of the things that you want to pay attention to, like that fat that we see on the screen there. So that's saturated fat and that trans fat. Those are things that you do want to be mindful of, that you're not having too much of. The same comes with your cholesterol and sodium. Consuming too much of these can increase the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So you do want to be mindful of that. All right. The next thing we're going to be focusing on is your carbohydrates. So here's where to look for when you're counting carbohydrates, which is the total carbohydrate. So don't worry about counting the sugar and fiber grams, because they are included in that total carbohydrate number that you see on the screen there. So a sample carb count for breakfast with a total carbohydrate goal, say of 45 grams. The example is 1 cup of cereal, which is about 24 grams of carbohydrates, a half cup of skim milk, which is 6 grams of carbohydrates, and then half of a banana, which is about 15 grams of carbohydrates. All right, so these are things that you do want to be more mindful of when it comes to reading the nutrition label. And don't forget to count your drinks. Remember, sodas are things that we call empty calories. And what I mean by that is they don't do anything nutritionally for you other than adding calories throughout your day. So you do want to be mindful of those drinks. And a good rule of thumb, I'm going to go back to this screen before with the nutrition labels. You want to use the percentage daily value. So what you see on the screen over there on the top or underneath where it says calories from fat per 10, you have the percentage daily value. So use that number to gauge how much a nutrient in a serving of food contributes to that daily diet. So anything 5% or less of that daily value percentage is low. So for example, when it comes to that total fat and that saturated fat, ideally we want to see something that's under 5%, which you see on the screen over there is 4%. So you understand that that particular package is not high in saturated fat or total fat. And then while 10% or 20% is really the number I like to look for, means it's high in that nutrient. So as you can see over here on cholesterol, it's about 28%. So this particular package does have a good amount of cholesterol. And as you can see too with the sodium, more than 10%, but underneath that 20%. As I said, when you're looking for something that's high, you usually want to gauge between anywhere from 10 to 20%. For example, if you're looking for something that's, high protein or high fiber, if you see anything more than 10%, it's going to be good. So you do want to use those two rules of thumbs that I mentioned before. So if you're trying to limit a nutrient such as fat, sodium, cholesterol, look for something that's 5% or below. And if you're trying to increase a nutrient such as a protein or a fiber, 10% or more is usually a good number too. All right. So now we're going to be focusing on how to measure and how to do portion sizes for your foods. So we have different examples on the screen over there too. And if you don't have a measuring cup, you can always use your hands, which we'll go over later on in the presentation. All right, so estimating portion sizes using your hand, because sometimes we're away at lunch, we don't have our handy measuring cups on us. So as I mentioned before, the palm of your hand equals about 3 ounces. And this is what you really want to be focusing on when it comes to that animal protein. So really go ahead, use the size of the palm of your hand. Now, for me, my hand, it looks about 3 ounces. But for someone who's much taller, it's going to be a little bit bigger. So use that as a gauge. And then a fist equals about a cup. And this is what you want to ideally have when it comes to your vegetables, a minimum of a cup on that plate. And remember, the more colorful, the more nutrients you're getting into your body. And your thumb equals about an ounce, which is something that you want to be focusing on when it comes to like measuring oils or stuff like that. So you do want to be mindful when it comes to estimating your portion sizes and just try to gauge as close as you can. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect. You're not going to always have a measuring cup on you, or you're not always going to have a food scale as well. So using this form of measurement is just a great way to estimate.